Good morning and welcome back to day 2 of our third 3-day conference on social emotional learning in higher education. Yesterday showcased impressive examples of emotional intelligence integration into the student and faculty experiences, from departments ranging as wide as finance, leadership, education, and taking the forms of freshman seminars, mindfulness, support groups, and full integration into the academic curricula, all receiving positive, measurable effects. Today's panel will no doubt be another powerful discussion, so grab your cup of tea, sit back, as it will begin in less than a minute.
Welcome. Emotions are everywhere. So how can we be smarter with our feelings? The answer is emotional intelligence, or EQ. We're delighted you're watching, because at 6 seconds, we're working towards 1 billion people practicing the skills of emotional intelligence. Can we count you in? Here on 6 Seconds channel, you'll find practical skills for work and life, inspiration for today, and support to build a better future for all.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term social emotional learning, it's basically a catch-all phrase to refer to the many contexts of learning and how we need the emotional depth and connection with our community and with those who are teaching and those in the learning environment to encode into long-term memory, and then also to have successful life outcomes in our relationships, our family experiences, and then also professional lives. I'm very pleased today to introduce Josh Freedman, CEO of 6 Seconds, to lead our first panel. And the issue of equity and systems of higher education is especially important at this time, and I can't wait to hear what the panelists have to share.
Thank you, Sherilyn. I think this is a really intriguing question. Next week, we're doing a panel on equity in K-12 education, and we really wanted to bring this into the higher education conference as well. At some level, I would think, institutions of higher education are places that are already deeply committed to equity. And yet we see today, we'll find out a little more about some of those challenges all around the world. And as Sherilyn said, social emotional learning is the process, the tool set, the methods for growing emotional intelligence and bringing emotional intelligence skills into our institutions. And we're increasingly seeing an interest in higher education, as we saw in yesterday's panel. We have one of our panelists next week wrote an article about when SEL becomes another form of policing. And one of our colleagues from Yale recently said, sometimes SEL comes across as racism with a hug. I think we need to confront how SEL can actually work to bring us into the situation to have difficult conversations and to grapple with what's real and not just gloss it over. And it's not about, let's just all smile and feel good. It's not about be happy. It's about let's deal authentically with what's happening inside us and around us. And issues of racism and a lack of social equity are pervasive in the world. And I think if we don't deal with this in education, we're going to have a very hard time dealing with it in the world. So I'd like to welcome a really awesome panel today. And I'm delighted to have panelists from many places in the world and many ranges of experience using SEL in a variety of different ways. And to get started, panelists, if you could please introduce yourself and just give us a metaphor of what this idea of the intersection of SEL and equity, what's a metaphor that captures that intersection? Easy question. Who wants to go first? Thank you, Claudia.
All right. I would say, first of all, my name is Claudia Wiedeman, and I'm Director of Education at the Shoah Foundation at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And I would say that a metaphor might be that SEL is a sleeping giant in the work we have to do to bring about equity at the university level. In other words, that there are opportunities here that we can leverage to bring about those principles that we need to change systems, structures. And we do that at the institute where I work by bringing about this change through the intersection of SEL, through the use of testimony from survivors of the Holocaust as our main resource. So I'll talk to you more about that in this program, but thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm really curious about this. I remember when I was a middle school teacher, just a few years ago, taking my students to the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles shortly after it opened.
Mhm.
And it was intense SEL and just a really important experience for me and for them. So I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. Right.
Susan, you want to share your metaphor?
My metaphor would be our emotions are us. And our emotions are not outside of us. And the sooner we understand that everything we do comes from an emotional place, the easier it will be for us to do the kind of work we want to do. As Josh, I am the director of the administrative program at Notre Dame de Namur University. Prior to that, I ran the same program at Santa Clara University. At NDNU, what we do, and both also at Santa Clara, we teach classes on social justice. And we try to address the issue of equity head on. No holds barred around the issue of equity and what is the difference between equity and equality. So this is how we do it. And just Josh, I brought my entire staff to the Museum of Tolerance when I was a principal in Los Angeles, when we were talking about looking at what is happening in the world. So my entire staff of my school, we went down, and that, like you, it was a really not only moving, but humbling and reminding us as human beings how cruel we are. So that I did.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Who's next? Kelisa?
Hi, everybody. So I kind of struggled a bit with the metaphor. However, I feel like, when we talk about social SEL, social emotional learning, I think there definitely is that social aspect. And so I thought about the words of Martin Luther King, where he talked about when he would be happy. And he talked about, not until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And so when I think about SEL and then equity is, it needs to be flowing and happening in every aspect of what we do. And that we also need to apply those words to, we need to have emotional equity and we need to have social equity. So in my current role with DODEA, I'm a professional development specialist, but also the lead race, equity, diversity, and inclusion lead for the agency as well. And I think it is that internal capacity building that must happen in order to truly achieve equity. There has to be an emotional investment as well as the social investment, but the emotional has to come first. Thank you.
And Kelisa, just in case anybody doesn't know, what is DODEA?
Oh, sorry. We are the Department of Defense Education Activity. So we are the education activity within the Department of Defense. We serve, our students are primarily military connected. So their parents either are serving in the military or their parents are civilians, Department of the Army or Department of Defense civilians who are working in support of our government. We operate in 7 different states. We're in all three regions of the Americas, the Pacific, and Europe. And there's only a 10-minute time frame in a day where our schools are closed. So we are always open. We have schools in Bahrain and all over the place. So thank you for asking, Josh.
Yeah, I believe it's the biggest school system in the United States. But
we're so stretched out. I think that's what it is. We definitely don't have as many students, but we're so spread apart all over the world.
Great. Solafa.
Hi, I'm Solafa Batterjee. I'm the CEO of Doroob, 6 Seconds preferred partner in Saudi Arabia. My relationship with 6 Seconds started 12 years ago, so I consider myself a six seconder. The metaphor that I thought of was social emotional learning. It's the equipment and the tools and the learning and the science that we need before going scuba diving, since I'm into scuba diving lately. So it prepares you to new environments, it strengthens you with the tools, with the thoughts, and empowers you with the feelings that you need to show your presence in learning environments. Just like scuba diving, we jump into the sea feeling afraid of the new experience, and once we're there, we realize how amazing it is. But it only happens when we deal with all our mixed emotions and we are well prepared to discover the beauty of new learning experiences. We have just signed with one of the biggest universities in Saudi Arabia, an MOU, to have emotional intelligence as part of their programs to empower their faculty and students. So being here is starting a new, very interesting and exciting path. Thank you.
Thank you, Solafa. And you have had some fascinating adventures, literally scuba diving and metaphorically scuba diving, as you've been bringing SEL into Kenya and Sudan and to boys and girls together in Saudi and now in the university. So we're very excited about the incredible work you're doing. And Angélica, what's your metaphor?
Hi, well, I was thinking in my metaphor and I was thinking about the sea, but so I change it. Maybe it's dancing. A year ago that we can make a presence ceremony of the last year of the school. I remember that we were dancing, everyone, that all the parents came here. The kids were there, the teachers were there, and we were dancing together. If you can get that in the school, in the metaphor phase of that, with the emotional intelligence, with SEL, and if you can get the people to dance together, you can have equity in the school. And how we did it in Mexico that time. Well, in Mexico, we work with the parents of the students and the college students, the university students, the parents that maybe in another country there, we don't work anymore with the parents. We work with the elementary students, but not with the parents of high school or university students. And then we work with emotional intelligence with them, with the teachers, and then with the students, in that order. First the parents, then the teachers, and then the students. So if everybody is in the same page, it's easy to dance together and to know ourselves, to choose ourselves and to keep ourselves, and to know our culture, to choose our culture and to keep our culture. That's the deepest part of our emotional intelligence program in Mexico with 6 seconds. So, well, that's how we did it here. And I am the CEO of CUDEC. It's a school, university well, we have since kindergarten through university. So we have 7,000 students. And we love to work with them in this, with 6 seconds. And that's how we did it in Mexico. Thanks.
Thank you, Angie. And it's remarkable to be in that environment and feel the sense of connectedness across generations, and to see university students and elementary school students connecting and sharing vocabulary and having a sense that they're in a shared journey. And I think this is a space of equity, of intergenerational connectedness. And I don't, Kelisa used the phrase emotional equity. And Kelisa, maybe you could just talk about what equity means and what is emotional equity?
Yeah, so when we think about equity, and many people, I think, confuse equity with equality. Equality would be if I showed up in this space and I said, I brought everybody size 8 shoes and everybody should be happy. But real true equity would be if I said, hey, Josh, can you let me know who's going to be here, what their sizes are? Do they have fallen arches? Do they need some supports inside of the shoes? And that would be equity. So giving people what they need in order for them to achieve in any whatever they need to do. Many times you see that fence used as kind of a way. I don't even like the fence at all. I think we just need to be providing people with what they need. And so when we think about emotional equity, those are meeting the emotional needs of people, having that deep investment in people. And you have to have the emotional equity before you can get to the social equity, which is making sure that our laws and our practices are equitable for others. But I think we have to get there through the social investment, that emotional investment, which means really being invested in the emotional lives of others, making sure that we are providing those equitable opportunities and access for everyone.
I heard the phrase the other day, not just diversity and inclusion, but diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And what if everybody involved in a higher education institution actually felt like they belonged there? In a couple of weeks, we have a panel on equity and well-being. And we know that globally, people who are disenfranchised have lower levels of well-being, mental and physical health. And part of that is emotional equity. So Susan, you've been around for a couple of years. Why isn't this already happening in colleges and universities?
Okay, I'm going to begin with a bold statement so that we can think about it. I want us to really think about this very seriously. Because if higher ed really wants to change, it needs to look at its purpose and drastically change 95% of what it does. It currently does. And I'm talking of higher ed all around the world, and particularly in America. It doesn't really want to change because higher ed is not defending the status quo. Higher ed is the status quo. It serves the system very, very well. Buying books on white privilege or anti-racism isn't action. I call that navel gazing. We have to look at the entire power structure and to look at what it is we need to change. Because we can talk about equity until the cows come home. If the system remains the same, we are always swimming upstream. Interestingly, that we had two metaphors of water, of the sea. Coming from an island, the sea is very important to me. And swimming upstream means you swim and swim and swim and you're tired, but you're not moving very far. So we need to look at the whole system as we talk about equity, or else all we will be doing is moving the chairs on the Titanic.
Wow. All right, that's a strong opening gambit. I want to just stay with this for a second on the purpose of higher education. So, Angie, you run a university. What is the purpose of higher education?
Well, the purpose of higher education is that the students can belong to the world. If they have the knowledge, the self-confidence, the competence, the skills, so that they can belong to the world, we have done our job. That's our goal. And it involves emotional intelligence, because they need to get along with the people where they are going to work, with their boyfriend, with the girlfriend, with the family. When they become parents, they will need to be with the kids. So that's a very important part. And I love what she said, because we have to do it in the deep way. We have to change the culture. If we don't change the culture, we are only swimming in the same place. We are not going anywhere. So we have to change the system, to change the culture. And we can do it through the kids, through the students, they are the ones that can change the world. So if we can do it with them, they are going outside and they will do it in every space. So for us, for the teachers, because I am a teacher, 25 years ago, I became a teacher this year. So since I am a teacher, I want them to be happy and to change the world. As you said, Josh, it's important for them to belong to the world. That's our goal in education and in the college and in the university.
I suspect relatively few heads of universities would phrase it quite that way. And I think therein might be the problem. Claudia, you and I, when we talked the other day, we talked about a very difficult question, which is about the individual work to dismantle racism is incredibly difficult inside ourselves. And yet that doesn't even touch the systems. So how do we do what Susan said? Like, what is the pathway to reinventing these massive institutions? And what is the role of SEL? Easy question for you, Claudia.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think, first of all, I think because this is a systemic issue primarily, and it's about systems. So when we think that SEL alone will bring about the change, we have to look at it in parallel to what needs to happen, and that is sort of top down, bottom up, like parallel systems where students, administrators, literally on the ground, are doing this inner work, reflecting on their roles in the system, identifying ways that don't facilitate equity, to really understand what equity is. Like, all that work happens at the individual level, between individuals. Sure, that needs to happen. But the other part of this is also looking at how the systems are set up to really critically look at and educate those at the university, at any university, to really understand what we mean when we say systems. So how might a system in place at a university to support students not actually be supportive. So for example, you may have programs for students of color or transfer students or commuter students, things like this. But these are programs that don't actually have a space on campus. They're not really there to support students in ways that really matter to students in their day-to-day. So it's sort of like multiple kinds of things that have to happen. We can't just sort of rely on the inner work. And I love how you started this whole conversation with that very important, critical question about SEL as racism with a hug. Because I think at the core of what we're trying to do here around SEL is that we don't want it to remain an individual thing at the individual level, right? Where we're doing this inner work and everyone is, has the developed capacities we need, sure, that we need. But we also have to sort of develop critical capacities to interrogate, to know what to interrogate in terms of systems and structures that students encounter, that administrators and educators perpetuate. Like that's the level of critical consciousness, if you might want to call it that we have to develop in every member of the community at the higher education level, is to see both. So I'm intrigued by that question or that comment you made for this conversation and any conversation about SEL in this very moment, because it critically looks at what is SEL in this moment. It cannot stay at the individual level or we're not going to get anywhere. Higher education was primarily in the US set up for a certain population and to address labor market systems, period. Then by the 19th century, fine, we had more progressive education and there you had more access, but it was still problematic in lots of ways and didn't invite the individual to be critical, to have any sort of role. It was just top down. But we have an opportunity right now with an SEL framework and frame of reference to really bring about the change we're looking at, bringing it, to these campuses. And I look forward to that because it is an important element, but certainly not the only one.
I just want to ask all of you who are here watching live, and if you're watching the recording, you can put it in a comment down below. Those of you who are watching live, I'm wondering if you could share what helped you feel belonging? What helped you feel like you had a place in your higher ed institutions? Or what failed? Let's get a little bit real here. And where, in your personal experience, what's not working, what is working in terms of this sense of at least emotional equity in higher education? I went to the University of Toronto for a couple of years, and then I went to UCLA. And it was striking to me how different the culture was in those two places. And at UCLA, I ended up in a really wonderful, magical program that I loved. Yet when I started there, I felt like a completely irrelevant, despite being a white man, felt like a completely irrelevant cog in this, pawn on this board. And this is back in the day when we used to line up to register for classes. And my wife and I were joking about how, our kids have missed learning how to stand in 17 lines. It's like, okay, go over there and stand in that line. Now go stand in this line. It took us 3 days to register for classes. And it was just so clear to me that as a, underclassman, I love that term, undergraduate, I had no real relevance there. Mm-hmm. And that's as a white man. So I just can't even imagine, as a first generation to college person, as a person who's coming from a disenfranchised community, as a person who's coming already feeling like, or literally not having a voice, how incredibly difficult that would be. Kelisa, I want to ask you a question. I don't know how much you can share about this, but you know, the U.S. military has historically been deeply committed to equity, and yet, and really being a meritocracy, and yet, when we look at senior levels, just like in most organizations, they're pretty white. And I suspect that a very large majority of the students in your schools are Black or people of color. And how does this power dynamic, this interracial power dynamics, play out in terms of the culture of the schools?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I served 6 years in the military. I actually chose the United States Army because it is the branch of service that most reflects our society. However, in the military, only 13% of people in there are Black people. I don't know the statistics of Hispanic, but then when you get into the officer ranks, that number drops even lower. However, the military, the United States Army does have the most diversity. But you're absolutely right. At senior levels, it is very white and it's very male. You know, I think it really impedes upon the decisions, the interactions, the policies, the practices that happen. Because when you don't understand, if you don't have the emotional equity, the social and emotional equity happening that you need to, you're making decisions based on white privilege, white fragility, white rage, all of these things that you don't even understand why you're operating in the manner in which you are. But then what you're doing is you're projecting these microaggressions on our students. Some of them are not micro, some of them are macro. You're having implicit and explicit biases that you are operating in, and you're not even cognizant of it. So it is so important that if an organization says that they are about equity, race, equity, diversity, and inclusion, that their leadership should really be reflective of that. And that tells you everything you need to know when you look at who is really leading the work. Is there really an equity commitment, or is it just lip service?
Solafa, I don't, again, know how much you can talk about this, but of course, equity in the context you're working in, a huge part of that is gender equity. And I would venture to guess that there are vanishingly few women in senior leadership in the universities where you're working. How does that play out? What's your sense of the role of SEL in addressing this?
So maybe I want to start by saying that those who work in educational institutes are aware that there is this official curriculum that is shared by the institute and being approved by officials and all stakeholders. However, there is also this hidden curriculum, and it is called hidden curriculum, that holds all the values, the hidden messages, communication style, the unwritten preparation for what the country needs in regards to social changes, economical changes, and so on. And what's interesting that although in Saudi Arabia, as in a lot of countries, there is those differences and addressing differences. However, because our educational system is segregated, there was always a need for females, and especially in higher education and in general education, to be able to lead these segregated environments. So education specifically is one of the fields that is, I would say, the most developed and empowering for women in Saudi Arabia. Maybe what I want to address here is that for educational institutes, especially in higher education, to be able to address such a subject, we really need to be aware of those hidden messages or hidden curriculums and see how they support or unsupport and bridge the gap between what the society and the individual, the citizens, believe in and want, and between the political direction or the social changes that governments would like to drive their citizens towards, as planning for the future. In the last couple of years, Saudi Arabia have been through dramatic changes, and we saw how educational institutes and higher education institutes played a major role in creating that dramatic change. Whether it was in preparing women for social leadership positions, or economic, or as ministers, or even as ambassadors of Saudi Arabia in different countries. However, this does not take me back to memories of being, looked at, being different in a university that I was brought in or brought up in, just because the way I dressed or the way I looked, although I'm totally normal as it could be for a Saudi woman.
Thank you, Solafa. Yeah, it's an incredible time of change in so many places. And in some ways, higher education institutions are good at change, and in some ways they're so slow. I know Susan and Claudia, you both work for higher education institutions that are fairly, well, Claudia's, yours is quite big. Susan, both of them have been around for quite a long time. And I wonder how able they are to really adapt to the world that we're in now. Susan, you were telling me about students needing somebody to talk to. And can you share one of those stories about this kind of SEL need that you're seeing for students of color?
The issue is that is to go back to the idea of equity and equality. Often what institutions do, they have means to get students of color, particularly first generation. I want to differentiate when we talk of students of color. I want to say this because there are many, 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 many students of color, Black and brown, who are doing extremely well because they come from upper middle class families. And they know the system, they understand the system, and they can work through the system. So that is one group of people. But the group I want to address are children who are first generation, that universities like to say, my social justice piece, I want the students. And Josh, I smiled when you said, there you were at UCLA, and you felt that you didn't, who am I? And you are a white male who came from an upper middle class family. I think your mom was a professor. And you felt outside of it. So can you imagine if you're a student, you are the first person in your family to go to college, and you are in this institution that you're excited you got in there because you were special, but you don't know how to negotiate the system. The system it's a system, and no one is teaching you how to negotiate that system. And this is what I found with both institutions that I worked in, that students of color who were first generation totally lost. And many of them drop out, not because they were not capable enough, but because they don't feel belonging. They don't see themselves. They don't, and the story I told Josh, I teach graduate students. I don't teach undergraduates. And 3 students one day came to my office and said, can I talk with you? And they were 3 African-American young women. And I said, sure. And what they told me was how lost they felt and had no one to talk to. And I said, then why did you pick me? Because you don't know me. And we all know why they picked me. Because I was the one person of color whom they saw walking around. And they felt safe that they could come in to talk with me. My issue with universities, if you're going to accept students, you have to go out of your way, especially first generation students, to ensure that they succeed. And I use the word ensure because there's nothing wrong with their brains. I meet them and they are wonderfully capable and intelligent. We have to make sure that they understand how to negotiate the system. And I want to talk about the interesting, Josh, you talked about what people are talking about SEL. I belong to another group, and what we talked about, and Amy and we talked about that. Let us make sure that SEL does not become compliance. And it's another way of helping people to be compliant to the system. So if we're going to work with our students, especially first generation, what you will do for a first generation child in the system, as Kelisa says, is not giving everybody the same size shoes. What Josh needed, what my daughters needed, it's not the same thing that a child who is the first member of a family to get a high school diploma and the first member of a family to go into college. She doesn't, or he doesn't know the system. And we can talk emotional, social until the cows come home. Unless we take care of their needs, they will be lost. And we have to be very honest with ourselves and what it is that we are doing and how we are doing it. So for me, it's something I felt so very sad when these three young women picked me because I was walking on campus. And we made a deal, we would meet once a week. And what they didn't know, I came on campus once a week in the evening and I made up a story. I told them I had class. I didn't. So I could spend time with them. I didn't want them to feel that they were putting me up. So we have to work with them. We have to work with their parents. Some of the students have 3 jobs. And I say to them, nobody can be successful in college going full-time with 3 jobs. You can't. So when equity, are we making sure that the tuition is paid? It's not that they're getting a whole bunch of loans. And when they're done, they go and they become a teacher and they have $100,000 or more loan while they're getting $30,000 per year. Yeah. Equity. So again, it's an issue that I'm very passionate about because it's not a joke. We have to look at the power structure, the entire structure. And we have to help children understand that power structure. And then we have to work with that power structure, or it will just become, another nice thing we do. And what we don't need now is nice.
There are a lot of heads nodding here.
I don't want. I always tell my students, I am not nice, but I am fair and I'm just. So again, equity is big.
Yeah.
It's huge. Thank you.
Angie, I want to just go to you for a second about this question, because I think in your school, you actually have quite a lot of students who are coming from relatively low socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. And your family, I think it was your grandmother, started this school. But you're working in a community that has a lot of people for whom college tuition is not affordable.
No.
So how are you doing this in Tlalnepantla? How are you bringing students who maybe are first generation to college? How are you bringing them to college?
Well, yes, As I hear Susan, I feel very deep engaged with her because we have a lot of first generation students. Almost 60% of our students in university are first generation. And they, almost 80% of them, they work and study. They study at the afternoon, our universities, so they can study and work. It's our model. So they can come to the university because their parents, they cannot afford the university. If they don't work, they don't have the money to come to the university. And we have a great staff. We have a great principal of the university, and all the people that is working with the kids. They love the students. They work with them. They hear them. We have a lot of programs for them so that they got skills. They feel engaged. They feel that they belong. Because if not, it's easy for them to go out of school. They leave it. It's easy for them not to continue because their parents are not, they didn't do it. So for them, it's like a very tough mission to finish the university. And we are very happy each time they can do it. But our staff, there are many of them, they are first generations students. Many of them, their parents doesn't have a university or a college degree, so they understand them. It's easy for them to understand. My grandmother, when she founded the university, she did it because we need one place like this in Tlalnepantla. We are outside of Mexico City in a very nice, in a very, I like this place, but it's not so nice. We are a little far away from the city, so we don't have a university that can take these kids. And now our staff is doing a great job with them, and we are. I am very proud of whatever they are doing in the name of my grandmother, because my grandmother will love to see that these kids, because she used to work in jail with them, with the kids, with the people that is there, so to bring them out when they are young and to bring them possibilities. And then our staff is working with these kids that maybe don't have the possibility to finish a career. And we have all the type of kids. We have multicultural kids that they speak 3 languages, but we have also the kids that are first generation, and they belong together and they work together. That's an issue that I love in this school, because we don't have only these kids. We have the others two, and they work together.
January feels like so long ago, Angie, when we were there.
We're here, yes.
It's like another lifetime.
Yeah.
But it's you use the word feel. Yeah. And I could feel it, and many members of the 6 Seconds team were there. We had team members from all over the world there. And, just people over and over again remarked on this sense of community. And I think that it's just incredibly rare in higher education institutions to think that we actually need a community, and for real, that's actually a priority. Claudia, I want to go to you and ask about the skills. Susan talked about essentially the idea that SEL could be used for compliance, like character education used to be. And I remember Alfie Kohn, when I was a teacher, saying, if character education would create Nazi collaborators, then you're doing it wrong. So, you deal with issues that are often legal and normal in society and yet are horrific. So what are the skills to put people in this place of being able to be disruptors?
I think at the core of a set of skills, really, to realize that is that students let's say, but everyone in the higher ed system, but that students recognize their agency. That's one. So that is really reflecting on how they see themselves, really thinking about their values, their experiencing, their experiences, validating who they are, where they came from, what those experiences could mean in their education, and to leverage those experiences, as some call their social capital, to navigate a system that, as my colleagues here today have indicated clearly, we know can be very oppressive for some students and not accessible. But it's really identifying that voice to be able to move and disrupt. Often our students are not really given the space to do that work, to do really the inner work, sure, but to see that they have a voice. We don't give students voices, they have one. It's recognizing it and knowing how to leverage it. So that's one, I think, one of the most important elements of SEL that we could really work on to bring about equity, but also to go back to the previous discussion around belonging. Because belonging, as opposed to equity and inclusion, belonging is that sense you get from the place you are in, like a university, that you belong, that you see yourself in these places, that you hear your experiences, you feel it, you see it in structures, in reality. And to bring that to life, individuals like students should have that sense that they can bring those, realize those on college campuses. That means, approaching decision makers, approaching those that have the power to bring about the changes students want. And so to be able to do that, I think students have to sort of have that capacity to approach, to disrupt, to have those conversations. And I do want to mention, because I did say this early on, is that at the Shoah Foundation, we use the 55,000 interviews we have with survivors of genocide and mass atrocity, from the the Armenian genocide to the Guatemalan genocide and others, that we use those stories of individuals who can tell us about what it meant, what it felt like, how it manifested to be othered, to be oppressed in the ways that they were. And we use that as a larger frame of reference in which students can then reflect on their own experience, because it says, oh, you're not alone, that this has happened before, and people can get through the barriers, can get through these hard things. And so that gives students the opportunity, the space to say, okay, well, maybe I can do this. And we've seen in our research that it helps to propel that agency, that sense that I can persist and I might be okay. That's how we use these testimonies. And I'm sorry I'm taking so much time, but I wanted to be sure that there is an opportunity here to innovate, to really think about new ways to bring about these capacities we're talking about today around social emotional learning, that we can do that in lots of ways. We haven't even touched the surface. So that's one example.
I think this term agency is incredibly important in so many areas.
Yeah.
It goes back to well-being, it goes back to the rising mental health crisis and the huge numbers of 18 to 25-year-olds who are struggling with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues all over the world. And that sense of agency is a big part of it. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Again, this seems to happen every panel. I want to ask you who are watching, and also all of you panelists, do you perceive yourself as a change maker? I mean, hearing you, I perceive you as change makers. Having met many of you, I perceive you as change makers. And I'm wondering, Kelisa, you were going to say something? I'm just wondering what has supported that agency in you? What has supported, what's the secret sauce that has unlocked that for you or called that forward? Or I don't think it's about putting it in. I think it's in there.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
What's fueled that changemaker spark in you that you would like to see brought to higher education everywhere in the world? So anybody who wants to go first, let's hear from each of you about that secret ingredient that's helped you.
So I was just going to say, and I'll be very quick, I know we're running out of time, but I definitely see myself as a change maker. I think I remember being younger, coming up in high school and college and everything, and looking and wondering, who will be our Martin Luther King, who will be our Malcolm X, who will be our Medgar Evers, who will be our Shirley Chisholm of our generation. And I remember thinking, looking at a quote by just where, by Barack Obama, and when he says, if we are the change that we're waiting for, we are the change that we seek. And so I think just internally, not looking left or right, but really looking internally and realizing that it doesn't take any grandiose thing, policies or anything. It just takes a personal commitment that I am going to, instead of have SEL, I'm going to have SEE. I'm going to have a social and emotional equity stance. I'm going to call out everyday bias as I see it. I'm going to always seek to be anti-racist in everything that I do. And so I think that's the secret sauce, is it starts with me. It starts with us. And if we hold ourselves individually and mutually accountable, we can really have the kind of world that we'd like to see.
I want to mention that Saturday is Mandela Day. And today, in 34 minutes, we have a special session about listening across generations. And if somebody could drop the link in the chat, you can still join. And we're going to have these listening circles to listen to people from different generations about being change makers. And then Saturday, we have a live stream where we're sharing that. And Mandela's message is very much echoes. Mandela was listening to Kelisa in that message. And Mandela Day is about, the world is in our hands. Angie?
Well, as you talk about Mandela, I remember that when I talked to the parents, I said, but Mandela has a happy childhood, because I have a book that says Mandela has a happy childhood. So maybe for me, it's to be the secret sauce is to make kids happy. And it came from my grandmother was a change maker. My grandfather was a change maker. And my other grandmother was a change maker. My other grandfather was a change maker. My father is a great change maker. My mother is a great change maker around the world. So for me, it's a transgeneration thing. I need to be a change maker. And then I saw the kids. I saw the students. I saw the families, Mexican families, all the work families when I work in Spain or in other countries, and that made me feel that I need to be a change maker as all my generations before me. So that's the secret sauce, I think.
Who's next?
I have a thought to share. I think, hearing from everyone, I think when a person connects with his why, this is where he finds his personal voice, excuse me, to connect and share with the world. I think if we focus with this young generation Z on their why, this is where they can find their personal empathy to connect what they believe in with their peers, whether they were similar to them or different. I think seeing differences, or the definition of differences, it has a new definition that is totally different from the past. And it's clear that all the systems, the cumulative system that has been applied in the past 100 years haven't really reached the goal that they were created for, or we wouldn't have been, standing here today and having this discussion. So maybe enabling, the young generation to actually focus on their why they believe that equity is a right, and when it's a right, then they are more empowered, rather than it's something given to them, and maybe flipping the power of policies in the educational system, especially in the higher education system, where we're not focused on the systems and the hierarchy of the decision maker, but rather listening authentically to what is really needed in these societies and the future that we believe in and we really want to create and develop for the future generations.
Beautifully said, Solafa. And speaking of multiple generations of changemakers, Solafa's daughter is on the panel in half an hour.
Wow. That's great.
Secret sauce?
Yeah, Josh, I think in my case, it was key relationships that I was able to develop at the college level, even middle school level. There were a couple of very key relationships that I developed that gave me access and information, knowledge, and developed at the end of the day, really a capacity to see my own power, to be able to now, if I had to, yes, I am a change maker. But to have really, it is about having that sense of self and of my power. And I think that's what is at the core of social emotional learning outcomes, is really about recognizing our own power to bring about change in lots of ways.
That reminds me of a 7th grade teacher who said to me, "Did you know that you were a leader?"
Yeah.
And I was like,
exactly.
What?
Exactly. Exactly. It's getting that feedback. I also went to UCLA, so go Bruins. But it is those key relationships and interactions that are important.
Susan, what's your secret sauce?
I believe, in the leadership class that I teach, I tell all my students the 3 R's of leadership: relationship, relationship, relationship. Life is all about relationships, and all the actions we take has to be what is the relationship we have with ourselves, and what is the relationship we have with others. And it's all about action. And what is it that I can do every day to make the difference in the lives of the people who are around me? What is it that I can do daily? And that is the big action. Sometimes there are big actions that we have to take. Sometimes, but mostly it is the small actions that we have to do every day. Looking around us, for instance, when those 3 young women came to me, it was my responsibility to respond to them. That's the action. For me, it was an honor that they chose me, but all of a sudden I had a responsibility to respond to them. And for me, that is what I call the change we make is what we do every day. It's the daily actions. It is not the big things that we do. I teach in India. I teach in China. I taught in the Namur. But these are moments. It is what we do every day. And that is why the world is in such a mess, because we have relationship with those we care for, but not those we don't care for. And I always ask my students to ask yourself, why don't I care? And that's the question I ask myself when something's happened. And it's, as Solafa said, it's not only the why, it's the what. It is the what and the why. And I always ask my students to look at the what and the why. And then it helps us to take action. If we don't take action, nothing changes. It's just talk. So for me, it's what the action. And I really value the small actions daily as much as I value the big actions.
Well, the Dalai Lama talks about this, that if you look at the millions and millions of acts of compassion, the millions and millions of people supporting each other in small ways, that is the force for good in the world. Well, I am so grateful for this conversation and for your time and the action you took to say yes to be on this panel. And I could listen to this for many more hours, and unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching. And Sherilyn, back to you for the last word. Except you need to unmute yourself. The challenging last word when you're muted.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. You can see my excitement with my body language, of course. I was just saying, what an incredible conversation. I'm going to have to listen to it again to take notes. So those of you who are asking, absolutely, the recording will be available here on YouTube on our 6 Seconds YouTube channel. We ask you to forward this to your colleagues, your loved ones who you think will find it valuable. Post it on social media with the hashtag SEL College. And also, we're a nonprofit here at 6 Seconds. So if you like these types of conversations and want to see them continue, please subscribe to our channel, like and comment below. We have another amazing panel tomorrow focusing on teacher education. And please, if you haven't registered for the conference, 6seconds.org/hire. Please register so we get your email so we can send you a kit of resources from all of these panelists who have compiled extra workshops for you to attend in August for free on these topics, and some other journal and scholarly articles as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
If this was helpful, would you please comment, like, share, and subscribe? The Emotional Intelligence Network is your community to grow and practice EQ. At 6 Seconds, that means being smarter with feelings. And we're here to provide practical, proven EQ tools so workplaces, schools, and people can thrive everywhere in the world. Be sure to visit 6seconds.org to find the complete suite of resources, assessments, and programs. Thank you for watching.